In this video, we will show you how to replace your vehicle's water pump on this Dodge Ram 1500 with a 5.2-liter engine. This will be mounted directly to the front of your engine. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. As you make your way over towards the passenger side of the radiator, that's where you're going to find your radiator cap. We're going to open this up, but it's important to note hand and eye protection at all times and never open your cooling system when it's hot. To open this, let's go ahead and press it down and turn it counterclockwise, a quick inspection and set it aside. Now we're going to make our way towards the driver's side of the radiator. In between the washer fluid reservoir and the battery, if you were to make your way down in this corner, you're going to find your radiator drain plug. Let's make sure we have a collection receptacle under this area so we can recycle the fluid properly. Just make your way right down through here. Now that the coolant is finished draining, we'll make our way back down to that drain plug and close it off. Let's make our way back over to where the radiator cap was. We're going to disconnect that coolant hose that leads to the coolant overflow tank. For this, typically you can just take hold of it, slide it right out of position, double check, make sure it's not cracked or rotted in any way. If it is, you just want to replace it. We can just go ahead and set this hose aside. You do not need to remove the coolant reservoir from the fan shroud. Let's make our way over to the other side of the fan shroud. On the other side of the fan shroud, we're going to be paying attention to the upper radiator hose and the radiator itself. We have to loosen the connection point. We'll be using an 8mm. You could also use a flathead screwdriver in most cases. Just want to try to loosen up that clamp enough that we can remove the hose from the radiator. Once you have that slid off of there, a quick inspection, soft and pliable, that feels good. Set that hose aside. Now let's start removing the washer fluid tank from the fan shroud. We'll make our way all the way down along the bottom of the washer fluid tank. In this area, you're going to find a small wiring harness and a washer fluid hose. Keep in mind, any fluid that you have in the washer fluid tank will make its way out. Have a collection receptacle handy so you can recycle or reuse the fluid as necessary. Just going to take hold of this, slide it off of there. A quick inspection of our hose. If you have any small rubber covers, you can try inserting that. Typically it will help. Now let's continue on to that wiring harness. For the wiring harness, I'm just going to carefully pry that out of place, being extremely careful not to cause any damage to that wiring harness or that washer fluid pump. You can use a small screwdriver, pretty much anything you got for a prying device. Just pull that off of there. Quick inspection for corrosion of any wiring harnesses that you do remove along the way. Go ahead and set that aside. Now we're going to take hold of that washer fluid reservoir and attempt to pull it up from the fan shroud. But what you're going to find is you have two locking tabs. They're pretty much impossible to see, but if you were to just use a long flat blade screwdriver, make your way approximately halfway down the washer fluid reservoir. We're going to go ahead and stick this straight on through, and that'll push in on those two locking tabs. Once it's apart, I'll show you exactly what we're looking for here. Now we'll lift up on this. You may have to maneuver this around a little bit. There we are. So essentially I came right up above the top of these. I gently pried it away, and that pulled each of these two tabs out of their corresponding ports on that fan shroud. We'll set this aside. Now looking along each side of the fan shroud, you're going to find two 10mm mounting bolts. As for the mounting bolts, we're going to remove all four of them, but the top ones, just leave them in a couple threads. A quick inspection. Let's make our way to the other side of the fan shroud here. Now we'll leave this loose with the 2 upper mounting bolts just barely started in and make our way in front of the water pump where the fan's located. Now looking straight in this area, we can see our fan, and you can see that the fan is actually attached to your water pump way down in the center here. Now we're going to have to remove the fan assembly from that water pump shaft. To do this, you want to use a 36mm adapter on your fan clutch removal tool, and we'll be turning this counterclockwise to remove it. Now continuing from here, you can see the fan unscrewing from the water pump shaft. You want to be extremely careful when it does actually separate so it doesn't fall down and potentially cause any damage. Get this out most of the way, and then I'll make sure I'm holding on to it. Now at this point, you can attempt to lower this down to the ground if you want to, but you want to be very careful it doesn't fall and get damaged. Let's just go ahead and rest this in this area. And now we're going to remove those 2 upper mounting bolts for the fan shroud. Now we can start carefully lifting this up. We're going to try to reach in for that fan. Slide that right out of there. Now we can remove the fan shroud as well. Now we're going to remove the serpentine belt from the area. You want to pay attention to the routing. You'll find that it goes over some pulleys and under others. After taking note of that, we'll make our way over towards the serpentine belt tensioner. For this, use a 15mm. We're going to pivot this clockwise, and that's going to release tension from the belt. We'll remove the belt from the area, a quick inspection, and set it aside. Replace as necessary. Before we continue taking anything else apart, let's just go ahead and make sure we clean up the area. It's common to have miscellaneous debris that falls down, and we don't want anything making its way into the engine. I'll use some compressed air. Now let's start working on removing the water pump itself. We'll come up along the driver's side here. You can see this tube, which leads to a hose, which also leads over to your heater core. We'll go ahead and pop this free by grabbing onto this clamp. It's a squeezable clamp. You can use some pliers for this. We'll slide that up the hose or down on the tube if you want. If the clamp felt like it was rotted and weak, you definitely want to try to replace that. That one felt like it was pretty strong. Continuing on, we want to go ahead and remove this hose from the tubing. You can use a hose pick to break it free if you want, if you can't twist it and break it free. Once that's disconnected, a quick inspection. Soft and pliable, not torn. Now we'll follow that tube down towards the water pump. You're going to find it has a bracket. That bracket is held in place with a 14mm mounting bolt. Now we're going to take hold of the tube, and typically you'd want to try to pull it up and out diagonally, but it's common for it to be stuck in place down in this area. Go ahead and use some penetrant, and you're going to want to try to work this back and forth. You could try to make your way underneath here and gently pry in between this tab and the bracket located behind it. Or just go ahead and carefully use some pliers. You can grab onto the tube and give it a little twist that way. Once you feel as though you have it broken free, we should be able to lift this up and out of position. A thorough inspection of the tube to confirm it's not rotted and damaged. A little bit of rust is fine. Replacement of that is really preference. This looks fine. Let's set it aside. Now let's move up from there. You're going to find that you have a coolant hose that leads up on the top of the water pump here. We're going to carefully loosen the clamp that's holding this in place. For this, typically you can use an 8mm socket, assuming it's facing in the right direction. Ours is tucked in and behind this area, so I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver. We're going to loosen this enough that we can move it around up and down the hose, and then we'll pause in this area and make our way to where the lower radiator hose meets the water pump. You can see that hose clamp is getting pretty loose here. Seems pretty good. Now that I have that clamp loose, I can see it moving around. Let's continue on with a hose pick right in this area to separate this. You will not be able to pull the hose up and away from the water pump. We do just need to separate it. Just try to work our way in here. Being careful not to cause any damage to the hose. Now let's move all the way down to where the lower radiator hose connects onto the water pump. Now as you can see, there is a clamp on here, and as for the head of the clamp, it's all the way down at the bottom, but it looks exactly the same as the other ones. We're just going to use our 8mm to loosen this up. Slide that down the hose. Separate the hose from the water pump. When you take this off, keep in mind there could still be coolant inside of your lower radiator hose. Quick inspection, set that aside. Now we can start removing our water pump mounting bolts. You're going to find that you have several 14mm headed mounting bolts making their way around the water pump, holding it to the engine. There's some out in the open up along the top, and there's going to be others down along the bottom that you'll have to remove. We'll start with the lower mounting bolts and make our way to the upper mounting bolts. We'll put a collection receptacle underneath the water pump. Now when I had removed that bolt, you can see that it's considerably longer. This bolt actually makes its way into the coolant jacket. Any bolts that make their way into the coolant jacket could potentially have coolant behind them, but you also want to make sure you have thread sealant on it during the installation process. We'll keep note of where each one of these bolts goes. It's another long one. As for this center mounting bolt here, I'm going to save that one for last. What you're typically going to find is that to get a socket on here, you'll have to use a shorter socket, and we want to be pulling the water pump away as we continue loosening this. So let's remove our final two. It's another long one. This one down here. There's another long one. Now this one's going to have to come in a little bit at an angle here. We'll be extremely careful. Make sure you're holding onto the water pump as you continue removing that mounting bolt. The last thing after this is just that upper coolant hose here. Let's take hold of that water pump. We're going to tip it outward and pull it down and off of the hose. There it is, friend. Now with that out of the way, the next thing we need to do is clean up the mounting surface. For that, I'm going to use a flat blade razor and make my way around the entire mounting base. You need to make sure you remove any debris or existing seal. Now I've scraped away as much of the gasket as possible. I'm going to continue on with some compressed air inside of each of the mounting bolt ports. You can hear that one leads into the coolant jacket. This one up here does not. Make our way down. That one does not. Does not. That one clearly does. We'll just go ahead and clean up our mess around this area. We can wipe it down. As you make your way around, just another confirmation that you have no miscellaneous debris or pre-existing gasket on any of that mounting surface. That can cause a coolant leak. Continuing on, you want to pay attention to the threading on all of your mounting bolts. The most important areas to clean up is the area approximately an inch from the tip here. So you don't need to make your way all the way up. All that's going to do is remove any of the coating from the bolts, and it might rust like this one is here. So we'll just go ahead and clean up the first inch of the threading and then continue on with the 4 longer bolts. For each of these 4 bolts, we're going to use thread sealant. You can use the liquid sealant, or you could even use the tape sealant, whatever's best for you. We'll just put on a decent amount on each one of these, and of course it'll work its way into the threads as we continue installing it. Let's have a look along the back side of the water pump and our brand new gasket. We want to make sure that you know exactly how the gasket needs to sit on the water pump properly. Just go ahead and take note of that. You don't want to have it in the wrong direction and then have to try to worry about setting it up once this is actually going into the vehicle. So we'll just have it so we know exactly how it needs to be on the back side of the water pump, and we'll temporarily set the gasket aside. Now let's focus just on that water pump. As we bring this into position, we'll be paying attention to where that upper hose goes onto. We're going to have to come in at an angle and start pressing the water pump into the hose. You really don't have much area to grab onto that hose, but it should be pretty much stuck in place. So we'll just go ahead and start working this up on there. Now that we have that, so the water pump's pressed all the way up on here, we can go ahead and get this clamp into a position that we can tighten it. Typically 4 clamps, you want to try to put them in their original positioning, but I generally like to have it so I can gain access up along this area. That's how I'm going to set the clamp. Be careful for any pinch points as you continue on tightening these clamps. Double check, make sure your clamp's properly secured. Continuing on, we're going to have to flex the water pump away a little bit and start installing that gasket. Just start bringing this up in here. You want to be careful not to fold it. There we are. Try to align that. As we start putting in the mounting bolts, you want to take your time with this. We need to be putting in the bolts, but confirming that each one of the bolts is going through the water pump, through the gasket, and then into the engine. You definitely don't want to miss the gasket because it's either pushed in too far or even out too far, in which case it's not going to seal. We're only going to start in each of the mounting bolts. Once all of them are started in, we can snug them up and torque them to the proper specification. Start getting this one in here. Get it lined up. Now, as I mentioned, we're only starting them in. We still want to be able to move the water pump around and confirm our gasket's properly seated all the way around. Continuing on, we have our smaller mounting bolts, 3 of those, 1 in the top center. Let's get the lower mounting bolts in here now. Confirm that all of them are properly started in so you are not cross-threading them into the wrong positioning, and we can snug these up. Now when we go to tighten the mounting bolts, we'll start with the upper center. First we'll snug the bolts and then we'll make our way around, torquing each of them to 30 foot-pounds. We did the top center, let's make our way to the 2 bottom mounting bolts now. And now the 4 longer bolts. For good measure, go ahead and make your way around one more time, a second pass. Let's install that lower radiator hose onto the water pump. Just go ahead and flex that as necessary. You want to make sure you bring it all the way up until it's bottomed out. Now we'll continue on with the clamp. As I mentioned before, it's a good idea to have the clamp in the same original positioning. Once you feel as though you have it tight, just go ahead and give it a wiggle. Make sure it does not slide around. The clamp needs to be tight. Let's focus on our coolant tube next. Up along the top area is where that coolant hose goes onto. You want to confirm it's a smooth surface. If it looks like it's rotted or weak, you want to replace the entire tube. Otherwise, if you had to, you can go ahead and clean it up with some sandpaper if it's just some light rust. Aside from that, we're going to make our way all the way down to the bottom. This is the area that would go into the water pump. You should find that you have a small O-ring gasket in your kit. Came with a brand new gasket, so we're going to be replacing this. Go ahead and slide it right off of there. You can use an angled pick or even a screwdriver. Continuing on from there, you want to go ahead and pay attention inside the groove here. Confirm there's no miscellaneous debris. Let's go ahead and clean that out as necessary. Once you feel as though you have it clean, it's time to install the brand new gasket. We can just go ahead and slide that right over the very end of the tube here. If you needed to, you could use a little bit of coolant to help lubricate this. I've lubricated that O-ring with some clean coolant. I'll just go ahead and take this and start sliding it down into the water pump. You want to make sure you have that O-ring seal down inside the water pump without it folding or getting damaged. Now typically it is going to be a little bit of a tight fit here. You can lightly tap on this area with a rubber mallet if necessary. Just hold it in the aligned position here. Okay, that went in a little bit too far. We'll just go ahead and carefully pull it out a little bit. Let's get in the mounting bolt. Start it in, snug it up. Let's get our coolant hose in position. That's going to slide all the way down to this area. You can see a small raised point. Slide it down on there. We'll bring the clamp into the original position. Once again, you can use pliers for this. Go ahead and take hold of that. Try to slide it off of the tube. It should not come off of the tube. Before you install your serpentine belt, go ahead and clean up the area. For this, we're going to use a little bit of parts cleaner and some compressed air. You want to make sure you don't have any coolant on any of the pulleys where it could cause damage to that belt. Now it's time to install the serpentine belt. When installing this, you want to make sure you have it in the same exact routing as when you had removed it. We'll start down at that crank pulley. As you bring your belt into position, we're paying attention to how it's sitting on each one of the pulleys. For the grooved pulleys, if you're off by even one tooth and the belt is hanging off in one direction or the other, you can cause serious damage to the belt or other damage. We'll just make sure everything's properly seated as we continue on. Now I'm going to take the backing of the belt across that brand new water pump. We'll slide it down and underneath the power steering pump over here. We're bringing it around, paying attention to the grooves, up and over the top of your AC compressor. Now I'm holding the other side of the belt along the back side of the tensioner. We'll start bringing it up and over the alternator, and then we'll continue on by holding pressure down along where the idler pulley is. Now we'll be using a 15 millimeter on that tensioner, turning it clockwise, releasing tension from this area, and we can slide this into place. Now let's just have a quick look. Up along the top of the AC compressor, you see exactly what's going on here. The belt is sitting off the tooth. Even one tooth can cause damage to the belt, as I mentioned. We want to make sure we adjust this. We'll go ahead and reapply pressure on that tensioner, slide the belt into the proper positioning. Confirm on each one of the pulleys. Along the bottom of that crank, it's easy to miss that. It's out of view. All the way around that power steering pump as well. It's perfect. Now let's have a look along the backside of our fan. This is the area that will go up against the water pump. You can see I used some anti-seize on that threaded area. Continuing on, we're going to install the fan and the fan shroud. We'll start bringing the fan shroud down into position here. Careful for that radiator. There we are. Continuing on from there, we also have to slide the fan inside this area and install it on the water pump. Start sliding this down in here. Just carefully start getting the fan in position here. There we are. Now that I have that started on a couple threads, let's go ahead and start securing that fan shroud. Let's start getting this fan shroud in place. We're going to start in all 4 of our mounting bolts for this. You may have to wiggle it around a little bit so we are not tightening any of them until all of them are started in. Now I'll just do the same on the other side. Same on the other side of the shroud. Back to our fan. Let's go ahead and bottom this out against the water pump. All right, that's snug. Let's tighten it up. Double check, make sure that's properly secure. Now on the same side of the fan shroud, we have to reinstall our washer fluid tank. We have the upper mounting point right up along here for the 2 ears, and if you were to make your way all the way down along the bottom, you're going to find a small slot on that radiator fan shroud for the lower tab on the washer fluid reservoir. Also, while we're in this area, something else to pay attention to, we have our washer fluid hose right here. That's going to go on the washer fluid pump motor there. And then lastly, for that washer fluid pump, you also have your electrical connector. Now let's have a look at that washer fluid tank. We have that small locating tab, and then over here we have our washer fluid pump. I have a small rubber cap on here. Once it's in position, we'll just go ahead and pop this right off of here. We can connect our hose and our electrical connector. Start bringing this down into position. Trying to get that tab rested in there. Now that the lower tab's in, I'm going to also pay attention up along the top. Sometimes it's going to lift up and out of there. We're just trying to line everything up and press it in. Listen for a click. It should want to settle in. We'll go ahead and give this a little tug. It can move around, but it does not come up and out of position. Now let's make our way back down to that washer fluid pump. Make sure you have your collection receptacle under this area. Pop this off of here. Make sure we'll cycle that fluid properly. Press the hose on. Let's just go ahead and give that a little wiggle, make sure it's properly secured in place. Continue on to the wiring harness. We'll get this aligned, press it in. A light tug, making sure it's properly secured, of course. Now it's time to reconnect the upper radiator hose. When you do this, you want to make sure you press it as far as you can up against the radiator. After that, go ahead and tighten up your mounting clamp. Use your 8mm or flathead screwdriver. We're going to try to have that clamp in the original position. I'm just going to spin it a little bit to make it easier to gain access to. As you can see, it went a little bit off kilter here. Just hold it in place, tighten it up. Now let's make our way over to the other side of the radiator now. We have our coolant overflow hose. We'll just go ahead and slide this right over the small tab that's on that radiator. Press it on there as far as possible. A light tug, making sure it's properly secured. If it does slide off for any reason, go ahead and use a wire tie or a small clamp. This feels good. Now let's move along the passenger side top of the radiator. Right where the radiator cap should be is where we're going to fill our cooling system. It's common for people to have one of these funnels. You can easily just push this into position, find the right adapter that fits on top of the radiator. Now once you have that in place and it's secure, you'd want to continue on with some brand new coolant. We're going to start filling up the coolant system through this area. What you'll do is you'll continue topping it off until it stops wanting to make its way down and it's sitting right about here. After that, go ahead and start up the vehicle, let it run for a short while and get up to normal operating temperature. While this is happening, you're going to find that a whole bunch more air bubbles make their way up and through here and coolant will make its way down and into the system. So continue topping it off. Now, once you've run it to the point that there's heat coming out of the vents, your thermostat should be opened up. At that point, the coolant started flowing through the system. You just want to go ahead and check this one last time, and then you can turn off your vehicle and replace your radiator cap. Now we're adding the manufacturer's specified coolant. Okay, I finished running the vehicle. We finished removing any air from in the system. We can remove that funnel system. Remove the adapter. Now I'm going to install my radiator cap. The radiator cap that I have has a release valve, so I have that in the upright position. Otherwise, if you don't have a release valve, you don't have to worry about that. We'll just continue on to aligning this with the radiator. We're going to turn it clockwise, locking it in. Since I do have the release valve, I'm just going to put that in now. Okay, friend, we finished our installation. The next thing we want to do is just double check to make sure we have heat coming out of the vents, no coolant leak, and triple check the belt routing to confirm everything's seated properly. Aside from that, close the hood, take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.